So we're now moving on to the final formal presentation of today. But you are now trapped in here, although I see one or two people might be trying to squeeze out for the rest of the afternoon. We're not going to have a further break, so we'll move on without too much delay. In trying to put together a programme for today, one of the things we, within the PWI, have generally been trying to do is increase the diversity of our presentations. And I know that Anne Waters may not be able to stay for the last question and answer session, but really pleased that Anne took up the challenge of that experimental we had with the breakout sessions and leading one of those sessions with some support from Alex Nelson. So we're trying to increase the diversity, but if any of you out there, or you've got colleagues out there who would like to present, then we hopefully make you welcome. You won't find it as daunting presenting to a PWI conference as you would to others, because the PWI is a really friendly group, and it is relatively easy to get up here and talk on stage. So please do feel welcome to put your names forward. But on that basis of gender diversity, really pleased to welcome next to the stage Ellen Wintle. I don't know quite why she's put some of these notes forward for me to introduce her, but she's currently the Infrastructure Director for Network Rail, looking after the West Coast Main Line from Euston to Crewe. So, yeah, great, and no problems with that. But he then wants to share with you that she's been in the rail industry for over 30 years. And I would never have guessed that. I've known Ellen for a number of those years, but it really doesn't seem that long ago that she's been involved. But 20 years of those of that has been working on E&P projects, but the last 10 has been much more in a multidisciplinary role in asset management and maintenance. So I'd like to welcome Ellen to the stage to talk through some of the challenges that the West Coast Main Line has and how Network Rail are addressing them.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for that introduction. I do have the honour and the pleasure of being the last slot of the day. So hopefully, and I can still see that we've got a lot of people here, but hopefully you're going to enjoy it. So, as Paul said, I'm the Infrastructure Director for West Coast South. And as an Infrastructure Director, what I lead is the maintenance teams for the track, signalling and E&P. I look after the examinations teams for buildings, structures and earthworks. I've got works delivery teams that deliver a lot of our minor CapEx works for track, signalling and line side. And I also have the team of route engineers. So I cover all disciplines with the exception of telecoms, which is fine because that's quite complex. As you can see, we look after quite a lot of assets on West Coast South. And that's a fantastic place to be. It's actually quite an intense place to be, as many of you that travel up and down the West Coast, you'll know it's a very unforgiving route. If we have an asset failure in that section of the line, it's felt all the way up from Euston all the way up to Scotland. So, fantastic job, but a lot to do. Over the next 25 minutes, what I'm going to cover is overhead line, but from an asset management perspective. So we've had lots of fantastic technical presentations today. And I'm going to sort of draw it back to, actually, what's it like being an asset manager? What are some of the challenges that we face, particularly in CP7, with the funding levels that we've got? What are some of the decisions that we have to make? And how do we work together as an industry and a community to address some of those? I am going to then finish with a little bit of nostalgia and reflection, because we are the PWI, and I just think it's the end of the day, and hopefully you'll like the little bit at the end. So, let's start. What's asset management? So, it's really, in basic form, it's the balancing of performance, costs, risks, and the performance that you need to meet a company's objectives. So asset management is a general term. We use it across lots and lots of different industries. For me, in my role, those objectives that I'm trying to meet is to make sure that we've got absolutely workforce and passenger safety that we've got high-performing, reliable assets, that we're looking after the asset life and the sustainability of our assets for the future. But we have to do that at a cost that we can afford. I was at the Network Rail business briefings yesterday that Andrew Haynes was there in Birmingham, and he talked about the similar principles as juggling safety, performance and cost as juggling balls. And you've got to keep them all up in the air. You can't drop them. And the golden one is safety. You can't drop that safety ball. But you can't keep that at the cost of everything else, because we have a railway to run. We've just entered CP7 at a point where the country is in need of funding. We look across all different aspects. And I think it's really sobering when we consider that actually investment in rail is up against investment in the NHS, in our schools, in our local authorities. My kids' school, they literally count every pound. And we talk in millions and billions, don't we? It's so important that we make every single pound that is invested in rail count. We have to get the best value out of it. We owe that to the country. So, CP7 plan, across the nationally, we've got over about 30 billion for maintenance and renewals. For me, on West Coast South, I've got around 800 million for CapEx and about 650 for OpEx. That sounds a lot, doesn't it? But you think back to one of those earlier slides with how much we've got to keep going, how much we've got to make sure is safe, is really high performing, and that's got to last 5 years. It suddenly doesn't start to feel that much. We're only 3 months into the control period, and actually already in the routes we're being asked, how much more can you save? So, how does that funding play out as an asset manager? So the first thing that we have to do is decide, how do we split the funding across the various assets? I will get onto OLE, but we are the PWI, and it's a system. So that's what we have to do. Now, each one of those is in absolute need of investment to keep our assets safe, to keep them performing at the levels that we need to be able to run a reliable service. And as part of recent organisation changes, I actually inherited the structures, the earthworks and the buildings assets. And I have to say that was an eye-opener to me. And I often think those assets can be a bit less understood, but the consequences of failure for those, an earthwork failure, a structures failure, can be catastrophic. So balancing and how you're going to divide the funds between those assets is a really tough job. Each asset at a policy and national level will use models to determine what they think they need to be able to invest and keep their assets at the level they need to be. But 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, that will always say that we need more money than is available to us. So we actually have to make some really difficult decisions. Decisions about what risks can we live with, which ones can we mitigate, which ones are intolerable. And that starts to drive the division between how we split the funding. My route engineers are always fighting each other for it. I mean, clearly, safety, legislative compliance comes first and foremost. But if our train service and performance is not where it needs to be, that's really difficult, because each one of us exists in this room to make sure that we can run train services. So that is the output of what we do. There we go. So, I mentioned that we're funded in terms of maintenance and renewals. So we've got OpEx, and we've got CapEx. And these funding categories describe the types of interventions that we do. So we'll have the operating costs around our inspection and maintenance. We'll have reactive maintenance maybe as part of that. And then we've got the capital investment, which might be refurbishments, campaign changes, full or partial wire run renewals. It's like, ooh, getting that out. And in the past, it has been a situation where there's been quite a divide between maintenance and renewals funding. So I remember the times where you're trying to get a maintainer to pay for something because that makes it cheaper for the project. Or likewise, the maintainer's trying to recover costs off of the project. Well, actually, that doesn't matter because that's all my pot of funding now. So what we try and think of is a TOTEX situation. So if I can't spend as much on renewals and CapEx, my maintenance is likely to go up. And it's that seesaw. But getting that balance right is not always easy. So how do we decide how we're going to spend it? So I thought I'd put some graphs and some tables in because they look good. And I got those from Technical Authority. Don't ask me too much about them. But we have to consider a range of criteria to inform the decision. So first, as I say, we'll look at safety requirements. What do we need to do to make sure our assets meet minimum safety requirements? We look at the age of the asset, looking at its remaining life. And we will try and forecast what the degradation is going to be over time. Wire run categories, number of pan passages, line speed, all go into that decision making. And the route criticality. So my route from Euston up to just south of Crewe, that's pretty much category 1 the whole way. And for good reason. It's high speed, got to keep it going. You get further north, some of the criticalities do reduce. I have to look at the operational impact of failure. If I have a failure on the overhead line at Hanslope, that kills the service. So sometimes we have to think about where we're investing. An asset life might want us to invest in one area, but you have to look at the operational impact of failure to be able to target that intervention. Ideally, we'd love to be able to invest in the lowest whole life cost solutions all around. But sadly, that's not always possible. And I know that there's some really difficult decisions being made at the moment, particularly with the investment that we have got. So it is about what we can afford. It's fair to say that most assets didn't get the level of funding they needed. I think that point's come across. And lots of people have talked about funding, talked about cost today. But actually what we've had to do in CP7 is move on to not necessarily having so many full renewals, but actually doing much more life extension works. And that's allowed us to spread the money further over a greater asset base. But what it does mean is it might be okay for one control period, but it's not really sustainable to keep going that way. So we might get through CP7, but by goodness, I hope CP8 can bring us a little more. I realised I was a bit premature in clicking the button there. So I'll talk through some of the common challenges that we have. And okay, so this could be for OLE, but actually I think this is common across many, many disciplines, whether it's maintenance or renewals. Engineering access, that is a premium. We've got to think of the cost of our delivery of the work. So there are some things that really challenge that, don't they? And in terms of that, we know that actually taking isolations, taking possessions, getting the work site, that really does take some time. My maintenance teams, midweek possession, 5 hours, they're lucky to get 1.5 hours working time on that. So when we think of the cost and we think of the productivity, it's really challenging. We do have layers and layers of process in Network Rail, don't we? And lots is there for good reason, but actually lots of it we do need to challenge and make sure that we're doing the most effective and efficient ways. We've got lots of improvements to safety And that, again, is all for good reason, but that has had a huge impact on the time taken to deliver works. So we don't work red zone anymore. We limit our on-tracking of machines and working under live, all for good reasons, but actually, really, that needs to be taken into account in the planning and resourcing. Across all sectors, we've seen increase in costs in labour, plant and materials. So I think things that used to cost whatever before, we're all seeing the increases in cost with that. We are so dependent on the way we're setting up our supply chain and the way we're looking to try and give a good future work bank and smoothing those works so we don't keep having peaks and troughs to allow us to get the best value. Resources was talked about earlier today, so it feels like Germany's in the same place as the UK. We've got a shortage of really skilled resources, and that's from frontline to engineering to construction. So whether we're Network Rail or whether we're a different company, it's really important to have those pipelines, be thinking of the future and how we're developing our people. I've got a big bugbear about when things don't go right the first time. And we'll see it in projects and we'll see it in maintenance. But it's really expensive when it doesn't go right and we have to go back and fix it. And it can leave us with some really, really difficult performance risks as well. So my plea to everybody, whatever you're doing, it's fantastic planning, quality work. Let's get it right first time. Let's make every penny count. And my last one on there, asset data. So, yeah, we all need great asset data. Any projects out there, make sure, please, 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 fantastic data, complete, accurate when it comes over. And I have to do the same challenge with my maintenance teams to keep it that way. That's easier said than done sometimes. So, I won't touch too much on this because I think I'll run out of time, but there have been some real challenges and different ways of working for us in maintenance. And I think we just shouldn't underestimate that. When I moved into maintenance, I was absolutely astounded by the stuff that the teams would do. You know, you get a defect in the day, they've mobilised by the night, and they're out there fixing it. But actually, we've made life really quite challenging. We don't work red zone anymore, as I said, and that's for good reason. But just as simple as your foot patrols. So we can't do foot patrols in the day. Well, some of them might be able to get it under a line block, but that's in, out. It's not very effective. So they do it at night. It's hard enough walking on that ballast in the daytime, but doing it at night, trying to look up, that's also causing issues. But the standard still says that we need to do them. We've got loads of technology. So why are we not using all of that technology to help us move forward? So for any technical authority people in the room, please, let's chat. So we need to move forward on that one. It sounds a bit doom and gloom, doesn't it? But actually, we've got loads of good things that are going on too. So let me touch on a few of those. One of these is risk-based maintenance. I guess lots of you will, have had different involvement in risk-based maintenance, but it feels quite new to us in Overhead Line. My Stafford and my Euston depots are working to that. Rugby and Bletchley are getting there. And this has really, really benefited us in being able to target inspections and interventions to the assets that need it at the time intervals that they need it. It has created more time for us to spend, let's just say, investigating a breaker operation after it's gone and actually understanding more about our asset. People have been a bit nervous about embracing it, and people can be that, and you can understand it. But we follow a strict process. We look at defects over a number of years, we have prioritisation rules, and we use those to reset the maintenance frequencies. I talked about access, and I think I saw a few nods in the room. Everybody feels that. So on West Coast South, what we've been trying to do is actually become more integrated in the way we plan our works. We've got lots of different assets working on the equipment in the same area, but taking separate access. So actually, what we're using now is an industry framework that we get all of the parties together and go, right, what is it you've got to deliver in that area? What's compatible to do? What are the different costs under different access regimes? Get the TOCs and the FOCs along, look at what their costs are, what the Schedule 8 costs are, what diversionary services can be run and capacity on that. And that's really helped us on West Coast South to identify some much more efficient access opportunities. We've got a blockade coming up on the DC lines in August. We've been able to justify some extended weekend blocks. Next year, we've got a 9-day blockade on the Trent Valleys, and we've got Hanslope, Christmas 25. That's much needed. So we are moving forward. It does take time, but that will bring benefits to all that are delivering in that. And of course, once the projects are in, I'll be saying to my maintenance teams, right, what else can you do in there? You fill in the gaps. Designing for maintenance. So, as Paul said, I spent 20 years in projects, and I honestly thought that we did an all right job of designing the systems for the maintainer. And then I came into maintenance and realised, hadn't always got it right. So, this is really important and gives us such a huge opportunity at the beginning of a project, at that design stage, to have really good conversations with the maintainers, with the operators, about how that equipment's going to be used in the future. We talk about minimum viable product. For me, that V is the really important one in that. It's not just minimum product. Let's think how it's going to be used. And in preparing for this, I did go around the depot and say, right, if you were in front of a bunch of engineers that were designing your railway, what would you ask for? And I won't go through it all, but those were some of their ideas. So, particularly road rail access points, because I get really frustratingly slow to get your machines on and down to site. And finally, technology. We've talked, I've mentioned technology a couple of times, but in reality, there's so much out there, so much technology that's been developed or in various stages of development. And that is, lots of you will be involved with that, whether that's train-borne monitoring, whether it's thermal imaging, whether it's the pantograph monitoring. All of this is fantastic to give us information about our assets, to be able to target, get information and then target the interventions that we do, so they're really effective. But our challenge, and I think particularly in Network Rail, is how do we make sure that we maximise and harness this technology? We can be slow to doing that, and we need everybody to get on board with pushing forward on that. So before I end with a little reflection on how far we've come, asset management is really a fine art of balancing safety, performance and cost for the railway. We don't have as much money as we would like. We probably never will. That's a fact. So we all have to get every last bit of value out of the money that we do have. Think about the role that you do and the contribution that you make, and how can you support that? Maximising technology, designing for maintenance, maximising our access. We are an industry that should share common goals. Our goal is to deliver a safe, high-performing railway at a price that the country can afford. And that requires innovation and collaboration between us all. So, I promised you a little bit of nostalgia and reflection. So, if the tech works, it's about 6 minutes video, then sit back, enjoy, and reflect how far we've come. Do I just click again?
only 3 electric control rooms for the whole system. From them, current will be fed to the overhead lines. But before they can be installed, the whole system must be re-examined. With a new Euston station under construction, a complete remodelling of the track and signalling was needed when electrification was on the way. This immensely complex job interrupted services at Euston for only 2 weekends. Many bridges were too low for the overhead equipment. In some cases, a new bridge could be built on top of the old one. At Cheddington, it was built alongside. The old bridge was then demolished bit by bit by a series of controlled explosions, so that some tracks were always left clear for trains to run.
A complete re-signalling program goes along with the electrification of the West Coast main line. Multiple aspect colour light signals will replace the semaphores. 5 power signal boxes will control the newly electrified railway.
Finally comes the wiring train. 2 flat trucks with wire drums on them, paying out the wire as the train moves slowly forward. Tops built onto them for the erectors to walk on and still stay in the same place. The catenary wire, from which the contact wire is suspended, has gone up first. Now the contact wire is being hooked onto droppers dangling from the catenary. The contact wire is then clamped to the register arms already in position on the supports. The register arms keep the contact wire in the right place relative to the track and give it the stagger, which minimizes wear on the pantograph.
South of the border or north of the border, the work on site is much the same. As the year turns through spring towards summer, work on the site, it's a site 227 miles long, seems slow but sure.
But none of the new trains are permitted to run until each completed section of the line is inspected by Ministry of Transport officials and by the railway's own experts. Every inch of overhead equipment is scrutinized. The behavior of the pantograph is observed on closed-circuit television. The wires are looked at from the flat roofs of the observation coaches.
Stop!
So I hope you enjoyed that and would agree that we have come a heck of a long way. We've still got lots and lots to achieve as an industry, but let's keep doing that together. Thank you very much.